The government never gave anybody anything.
I'll tell you what. You want to find me? Well, you just look over your shoulder, because from now on, I'm going to be right behind you.
HBR Talk with Hannah Wallen. More than once in HBR News, we've highlighted instances of tolerance among official sources for Antifa and Black Lives Matter rioting. We've noted that there are politicians in some areas capitulating to the mob by doing what they've been asked, removing funding from their local police departments. We predicted that this combined tolerance for crime and reduction in police budgets would result in cops abandoning their profession. Now we're seeing it happen, and it's being discussed by other political commentators. Many on the right are predicting chaos, as if chaos isn't what's already happening in cities around the country, right now in full view of police forces. Businesses are still being looted. Government buildings are still being attacked. Whole neighborhoods have been burned. Some were, and at least one still is, occupied. Mayors in some of the most heavily impacted cities not only did nothing to protect their constituents, but actively took measures to stop state and federal government from stepping in to help them. We know what these terrorist groups have described as their motives. They want this. Their claim is that they want to reimagine policing and replace it with social work. Authoritarian conservatives are very upset about this idea and have ridiculed the proposal with narratives about social workers responding to 911 calls about burglaries, rapes, and murders in progress. They forget that there are whole areas of crime that involve non-violent, non-emergency situations, some of which aren't well handled by criminal law. Were it not for the violent, chaotic, and coercive methods of Black Lives Matter and Antifa, there could have been a productive discussion about this, one that included questions regarding the necessity and validity of some laws and the handling of others, and ideas about reining in government abuse of the nation's local police forces. For example, is criminalization really the best approach our society can take to citizens consensually indulging in behaviors known as vices? Proponents of keeping vices criminalized cite self-destructive indulgence in the same way temperance advocates did with alcohol. They may bring up the criminal elements inherent to the economic end of various vice indulgence markets, such as forced labor and child exploitation in the sex work and drug industries. They may cite associated gang violence as well. Some argue as if these are inevitable aspects of these markets and advocate strict laws and heavy enforcement to protect the public against harm done by human traffickers. Proponents of decriminalization argue that these factors are mostly a result of the underground markets created by vice law enforcement. The logic, if gender were totally removed from it, is that by allowing consensual adult indulgence markets to exist openly without fear of prosecution for engaging in or marketing the indulgences themselves, decriminalization would remove the cover under which forced labor and other abuses take place, as well as the related gang violence. Replacing vice laws with support for abandonment of these industries by both their labor force and their consumers might be far more effective in reducing destructive behaviors associated with indulgence in vices. After all, when was the last time you saw a fiery turf war between scratch-off lottery salesmen at the corner gas station, or a convenience store clerk tracking down and roughing up a recovering gambling addict for ceasing to buy tickets at his counter? So maybe marketing the indulgence of other consensual adult vices is an area in which prohibition and police work could be replaced with healthcare and social work. Having room for a discussion about such legislative reform is one thing. Arguing to convince authoritarian politicians that your average citizen is over-policed, and some laws may have crossed the boundary between reasonable government regulation and the citizen's right to personal autonomy, could bring about needed change that would be beneficial to everyone. Rioting in the streets to back that argument seems kinda counterproductive. And yet, in cities across the country, there are politicians who are taking action supposedly in response to the mostly peaceful riots. Authoritarians who want to tax you into the poorhouse, eliminate your gun rights, decide what kind of car you can drive, tell you how many ounces of pop you can buy as part of your artery-clogging fast food order, and even dictate what kind of straw you can use to drink it, have been defunding the departments within their cities that would enforce those laws. They've been ridiculed for it by Republicans who have almost hit the mark by asking the obvious question: if these micromanaging megalomaniacs get rid of their cops, Who is going to force the public to obey them? I say missing the mark because underneath all of this are some other much more important questions. What motive would career politicians have for doing that? Career politicians, even those of the local variety, do not ever give up government power. They find ways to get their constituents to come crying to them to use it, and they often find themselves quite willingly obliged by women who want life to be safe, secure, and smooth, and many of whom are all too willing to sacrifice rights and freedoms, especially those of others, to get those conditions. That has fueled government annexing of citizens' human rights for far longer than either sex has had voting rights. You might say their entire job is a scheme engine that feeds itself on the pressurized vapor of women's tears. So, why would politicians ignore their constituents and cave to two neighborhood-burning terrorist groups who are traveling around the country wreaking havoc and demanding that they remove an area of government power? Another thing to wonder is why these terrorists apparently have not noticed and questioned the ease with which they are getting what they claim to want. For people who don't trust the government, they seem awfully naive, don't they? The same news reports we read are publicly available for everyone else to read as well. They have to know they are not winning by force. They've seen cops in riot gear standing by while they looted and burned city after city. They know that the mayors of several cities turned down state and federal assistance to end their violence, yet they appear to not have wondered why. Is it maybe because the goals of their leadership and even their grassroots are the same as those of the politicians that are condoning their actions? Yet another question. Why are so many commentators missing the mark on this? Do they not recognize the set of narratives and attitudes behind this political puppet show? Do they not see the pattern of manufactured crises, scaremongering, and female-led calls for government response, followed by additions to existing government authority and interference in people's lives? Maybe they can't. Maybe they're not so aware of the way politicians use female instincts, promised safety nets, and controlled chaos to keep themselves comfortably in power. But we are, and you are, aren't you? And you already know my final question. You've watched the build-up. You've watched the dam break in current events. You've had the curtain drawn back on that charade the whole time. You've seen enough. You've heard enough. Have you had enough? Are politicians using manufactured, targeted, and controlled chaos to scare suburban women into ushering in a federally run police state? What has been and will be the impact on men and boys? HBR Talk will explore this topic and its implications this Thursday at 7:30 p.m. The discussion streams on multiple platforms. You can tune in to the live stream via the link in the low bar, or find other viewing and listening options on HoneyBadgerBrigade.com.